right, God on Film coming next weekend. And hey, there's some great movies coming out in theaters this summer and some even greater conversations to be had about some of them. So what do we do often in the summer is we take some of the big movies in theaters and we pull apart the storyline, the plot, the struggles that maybe characters are going through, and then we dive into scripture to see what that has to say about it. And we give away tons and tons of free movie tickets to every first-time guest and the people who bring them. So we got these cards in your program. We've got a bunch of them out in the lobby. Grab these, bring somebody back, invite them. You play your cards right all series long, not just next weekend. Bring a friend. They get a movie ticket. You get a movie ticket. You can watch a bunch of movies this weekend or this summer for free. You play your cards right. Plus, I should say next weekend is Move Up Weekend. And here's what that means. If you got kids, parents, if you got kids, you want your kids to be here next weekend. All through our children's and youth classes, kids are moving up to the next class. And it's just the way to start them into this next season, right? Give them a head start into the summer, into their experience. It will shape that. And if you're a parent, you really want to get your kids here next week. Arrange your week around it, whatever you have to do. And we got this movie, this ice cream truck that's going to be here, and we're going to be giving away free ice cream to the kids. By the way, adults can get ice cream too, but you got to pay for it, okay? We're treating your kids. You have to pony up for your own ice cream. I think that's fair. So all of that is next weekend. It's going to be great. But today we are in the series finale of our series, Truth Be Told. And since it's the last week in the series, I just got to ask you guys, because this keeps coming up. You do catch the thing with the pants on fire, right? Oh. Okay, so subtlety in the series are not necessarily a good thing. All series long, people have been going, the pants are on fire. Yeah. All right, but we've been talking not about pants on fire. We've actually been talking in this series about the things that we believe. The things that we believe, not necessarily what we say we believe, not what we even think we believe, but what we really, truly, actually believe. The ideas, to riff a little bit on philosopher Dallas Willard, are assumptions about reality, about life and ourselves and others, the people next to us right now, about love and romance and sex and sexuality and conflict and success and failure and gender roles. And what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be a failure? Ideas about God. Is there a God? What difference does that even make? Beliefs that we've been saying form our mental maps. Our mental maps which govern unconsciously how we navigate through life, through the wins and the losses and the upsets and the victories and the tragedies and the hardships. Like how we handle the circumstances in our lives are governed unconsciously by our mental maps. And to the extent we've said that our maps reflect truth, which we defined at the top of the series as reality. Truth is reality. Truth is reality. When our maps reflect that, life works. Like life actually flourishes even when the things around us are not necessarily flourishing. But to the extent that we have believed lies, which we defined as unreality or that which does not correspond to reality, and we all have believed lies about ourselves, lies about the people around us, lies about what it means to be human, lies about life and success and happiness and what that entails, and sexuality and failure and tragedy and loss and God, and maybe especially the lies that we've believed about God. To the extent that we believe lies, life struggles. We struggle because we said in week 1, reality is what we run into when we're wrong. Reality is what we run into when we're wrong, and we can all relate to the struggles that seem to repeat themselves in our lives. They're just like on repeat. It just happens, often against our wishes, even against our own good intentions. Like, I swear that will not happen again, and then it does. It's almost as if something unseen in me is sabotaging me. And we all have, through hardship, through wounds and parent wounds and family of origin issues and our choices and media and daily messages that we're bombarded with, we have all added beliefs to our maps unconsciously, unwittingly, and by the way, uncritically. We do not evaluate these beliefs and then choose like, yeah, that's a good one. Like, I'm a failure, I'm a loser, and therefore what I do will fail. Like, yeah, I kind of like the ring to that. I'm going to drop that way down deep inside and let that run behind the scenes of my life. That's a good one. I'm unworthy and unlovable. Like the real me, I'm unlovable, and so I need to prop something up or look a different way, or I'm unworthy of lifelong, just healthy knowing and being known, authentic relationships. I'm not worthy of that. Yeah, that's probably true. Let me think through that, and yeah, I'm gonna believe that people cannot be trusted. They will leave you. They will let you down, so you better keep your guard up. That sounds like a really smart, healthy belief. I'm going to add that. I'm going to just drop that down in here. But there are these beliefs, these scripts, these ideas that actually run behind the scenes in our lives, not things we would necessarily say or even think we believe, but those beliefs actually determine how we see what's happening to us and then how we feel and react in response to what's happening to us, which ultimately really shapes the kind of person we are. That what we believe determines what we see, which determines what we do, which eventually determines who we become. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world through the lenses of what we expect and think that we will see. And that shapes how we respond and react, which ultimately determines who we become, which is why recognizing and extinguishing the lies, the unhealthy ideas that we believe is really important. So previously on Truth Be Told, we began this famous quote. You've heard it before. Even if you didn't know Jesus said it, he did. It's actually half a quote. The famous line is actually half of the quote. And the quote goes like this. I'm just going to say the first part and let you finish it with me. Here's the first part right here. You will know the truth, and the truth will, what is it? Set you free. Man, the truth will set you free. You've heard that before. Now, that's not the whole quote. That's only half the quote. Here's what Jesus actually said. If you hold to my teaching, then you're really my disciples, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In other words, you've heard my teaching. You've heard the things I said, but hey, and here we all know this is true. Hearing is not knowing. Hearing is not the same as knowing. If you do this, if you do the truth, if you do that through repeated practice, bring this into your life through failure and success and working it into the fabric of your mental maps, then you will know truth. Not just know it, you will know truth. And that truth, as it transforms the way you experience and interact with reality, it will make you an incredibly free person. Now, Jesus is linking truth and knowing truth with real freedom, at which point we talked about this in week 1 of the series. The listeners push back to that statement with a response that is so ironic and full of denial that it's actually funny. They say, hey, what do you mean that we'll be set free? We've never been slaves to anyone. Exhibit A, the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures. Exhibit B, the Roman Empire, right then and there. But Jesus just patiently redirects, doesn't really argue with them, just trying to go deeper, trying to draw the link for them and for us between what we believe and what we do and what we keep getting in our lives. And Jesus simply responds very truly, or truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. That the choices, this is so profound, the choices we make in our freedom will ultimately enslave us. Choices that miss the mark, which is what that word sin refers to, that miss the mark of how God designed life to be lived, we will eventually be enslaved to that. And this, if you remember, launched Jesus and those listeners into this challenging debate, a debate between Jesus and some religious leaders who, by the way, are trying to kill him. That's kind of the subtext or the subplot of the story, in which Jesus begins riffing on an ancient origin story that's actually running behind the scenes of their entire conversation, a famous story of a place called Delight and two people named Human and Life, better known as Adam and Eve. And it's often seen as a story of temptation, but it's really a story of deception. It's a story of deception. It's the origin story of how everything went wrong. And it's all tied to this highly symbolic tree of knowing good and evil, of seizing autonomy and determining for ourselves, I will know for me what is right and what's wrong, what is good and what is bad. And one of the many interesting things about the story is that the serpent, who also very symbolic in the story, never tells Eve to eat the fruit. Eat the fruit, Eve. It's delicious. You're gonna want that. Just grab it and eat it. Never actually tells Eve to eat the fruit. he simply comes at her with an idea, a deceptive idea that sows fog and confusion and disinformation into the three great questions of life. Questions that this series has been built around. Who is God? Who are we? And what's this life for? Who is God or the gods, or is there a God? And what does that even mean or difference does it make? Is there more to this life than this life? Who are we? What does it actually mean to be human? And what is a well-lived life? What is the good life? What is this life for? Who is God? You can't trust him. He's holding out on you. He's trying to limit you, trying to control you. His ridiculous restrictions have way more to do with him than they do with you. Who are we? Well, if you seize autonomy and you determine for yourself what's right and wrong, you can transcend the limitations that God is putting on you, and you can be like God. You can be the goddess or the God of your own life and your own universe. Identity is self-defined. You determine who you are. You define you. And what is a good life? Well, that's up for you to decide. You determine that for yourself. Only your heart knows what is best and right for you. So you follow your heart and you follow your desires, and you will be happy and your life will be better. After all, that's what freedom is all about, isn't it? I mean, that's freedom. To quote Elsa from Frozen, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. There's no right. There's no wrong. It's just what I decide, what I want. I'm free, which brings us back to Jesus' famous quote, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free if you hold to my teachings." Free. Now, free. We love that word right there. We love that word. It's Memorial Day weekend. We love us some freedom. Like, that's our thing. Liberty. We got a statue and all. I mean, like, we really are into the freedom thing. But is Jesus using this language like the way that we normally think of what it really means to be free? Does he mean that when he says that? See, our freedom, our understanding of freedom, and a little bit of history lesson for us. Many of you already know this, I'm sure. Our idea or concept of liberty or freedom was shaped by the Enlightenment back in the 1700s. The backstory of the Enlightenment was this philosophical, political, cultural movement that involved throwing off authority, if you will, as a defining force or source of our lives, whether it's monarchy or patriarchy or religion, some of which, by the way, was a good thing. The throwing off of authority and the elevation of autonomy, of the self as this, like my own personal reasoning, my own personal rationalization, that is what is most important. In fact, philosopher Charles Taylor, in his seminal work, A Secular Age, writes about how the West has moved from what he calls a culture of authority to a culture of authenticity. And he writes that we no longer live by what authorities, whatever that might refer to, the authority of the tribe, of the culture, of the family, of the village, of the government, the nation, the religion, the faith, whatever that might refer to. We no longer live by what authorities tell us is right or wrong or tell us to do, but from what he says our inner authentic self wants to do. And freedom in the process was redefined subtly but significantly from historic philosophical underpinnings. Freedom was redefined to mean the ability to do whatever I want. That's freedom. Freedom is the ability to do whatever I want, whatever I choose. I'm free to do, in the words of the Bodines, whatever I want, any old time, right? And then slavery becomes anything that represses internally or constrains that ability to do whatever I want. It's freedom from all external restrictions, freedom from limitations, freedom from other people saying what I cannot do. But this definition, what we may or may not know, this definition, this understanding of freedom, what it really means to be free is not how freedom has historically been understood actually by anyone, by any people, anywhere, east or west, north or south. This is a dramatic shift. In fact, it is a map of reality. It is a map of reality according to all history and all current scientific research that leads us far, far from the good life. Now, to get at this, I want to take a look at a letter written by a guy named the Apostle Paul. You may have heard of Paul before. This letter is written to a community in a region called Galatia. It's called the Letter to the Galatians. Galatia was a part of the Roman Empire in modern day, like central Turkey. And Paul had started a number of churches there in the 40s AD. In fact, these were the first churches he ever really started of his own. And there's so much drama and adversity in the launching of these churches. You got to read it for yourself. The backstory is Acts chapters 13 and 14. And then others came in behind him after he moved on because he was getting chased out of these towns, town after town, sometimes violently so. And others came in behind him and began to sow lies. Lies, like false beliefs into their maps, but things that sounded so true and seemed so true and yet were deeply destructive. Beliefs and ideas that Paul was certain would enslave those friends of his. And so he writes this letter, and the letter is so personal and it's deeply emotional. And chapter 5 in this letter marks a turning point from dismantling the lie that has been kind of dropped in there and incorporating and applying some truth. And so he's been using this analogy of slavery and freedom. And here's what he says as he turns the corner and begins to apply this. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Now, this may surprise you. This may surprise you that Christ's passionate desire for your life is that you truly are free. I mean, really, wildly, passionately, wonderfully free. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. And don't we all want to be free? I mean, of course we do, right? I mean, that's what America is all about. It is the land of the free, which makes this next statement kind of odd. So stand firm then. And do not let yourselves be burdened by a yoke of slavery, which raises the question like, hey, if we all want to be free, who would let themselves get enslaved? Which brings us to an interesting observation that we all know is true. Like, you know this, that not all free acts lead to freedom. Right? Like, not all free acts, not all free choices lead to freedom. You are free to smoke what you want to smoke, especially now that it's legal. You are free to look at what you want to look at. You are free to spend how you want to spend and sleep with who you want to sleep with. You are free to choose whatever path you want for your life to walk down until you're not. Until you've gotten down that path a ways and you realize that you can't unchoose. And you can't unwind what you have wound up, and you can't undo what you have done, and you can't even seem to choose otherwise, even when you want to. The therapeutic term for this is compulsion, which then leads to addiction. It's like, I was doing this because I was free, and now I don't want to do it anymore. But I'm not free not to do it. The things we choose in our freedom will often hold us as their prisoners. Our capacity, that's why our capacity to live free is relative to our commitment to stand firm. Our capacity to live free is relative to our commitment to stand firm, to use our freedom to pursue only things that will make us free. Our capacity to live free is relative to our commitment to stand firm. And so Paul goes on to say, you brothers and sisters, jumping down to verse 13, you brothers and sisters, you were called to be free. I mean, that's your destiny. You're called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Now, this term flesh is a word that Paul often uses somewhat philosophically to refer to our physical appetites, or you could say like our basic cravings or our drives, our impulses. Essentially what Sigmund Freud referred to as the id. It's that kind of just like impulsive, craving, wanting part of all of us. And the ancients knew something that we all seem to have forgotten. This was very clear in many contexts in the ancient world, that the things your appetites want are not always good for you. Like, your appetites themselves are not necessarily bad, but the things your appetites want are not always good for you. I mean, if you got kids, you know this is true, right? You know that if you give your children everything they want, every time they want it, you will not have good kids. They will not be good kids. In fact, we have a word for kids like that. It's the same word we use for fruit when it's gone bad. Those kids are spoiled. Like, man, you ruined them. You ruined them. They're overfed, overindulged, overstimulated, entitled, underdeveloped, underchallenged. It's spoiled. because our appetites, right or wrong, are not always good for us. You were made to be free, Paul says. You're called to be free. Christ sets you free to be free. But if you use your freedom to indulge your appetites, to indulge your desires, you will not be free for long. And it is not going to be a good life. That's not freedom, he says. That's not freedom, and that is not how to be free. And this is so brilliant. He says, this is so smart. Here's how to be free. Rather, he says, serve one another humbly in love. That's freedom. That's freedom. Serve one another humbly in love. That's freedom. And that's actually what freedom is for. And then he goes on to say, following Jesus' lead, that this line right here is actually an accurate summary of the entirety of the Hebrew scriptures and what was known as Torah or law. For the entire law is summed up or fulfilled in keeping just one command. There's just one rule you really need to know. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. Done. Like that's freedom. And it's interesting. It's interesting for me, for Paul, the opposite of just indulging my desires is serving in love. The opposite of indulging my desires is actually serving others in love, which may sound confusing in our world because we often confuse love for desire, right? In fact, we often use the word basically synonymously with desire. I love mud pie. I love coffee. I desire them. I want to consume them. That's what I mean. And when someone says I love my boyfriend or my girlfriend, they often mean the same thing. I desire, I want to consume. And again, desire is not necessarily bad, but it is definitely not love. Love is not a desire. Love is not a feeling. Love is an act of will to put another person's highest good above my own self-interest. Love is an act of will, regardless of how I feel, to put another person's highest good above or ahead of my self-interest, even when it comes at the cost of something I desire or want in that moment. The flesh is anti-love. The flesh is anti-love. It does not want to do that. It takes time. That takes work. That takes like higher level thinking. That requires me to wonder what would truly be their highest good and then to will or desire that. This is not instinct driven. This is not desire driven. The flesh wants what it wants right now. Augustine once called the flesh love turned in on itself. Flesh desires. Love serves. Flesh takes. Love gives. The flesh is anti-love. Desire is often anti-love. And the truth about me, as I look at that, truth about me is I got both of these going on in me at the same time. I have both of these often happening under the hood at the same time. Like there's this part of me that wants to be generous and creative and selfless and full of grace. And there's another part of me that is all about me. Like what about me and my needs and who notices and does anybody care? In fact, get this, I'm so crazy. I can be all about me while I'm serving other people. I know that sounds bizarre. Like while I'm serving something else, I can be all about me at the same time. Like here I'm doing this great act of service. Hello? Anybody notice? Like I just did that. Anybody? Like I can actually be about myself and what I'm getting when I think I'm loving somebody else. And so notice where Paul goes next. He says, here's the solution. Here's the solution. I say, walk by the Spirit. Walk by the Spirit. We're going to come back to this idea, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. That's what the flesh is, right? You just do this one thing, and you won't have to worry about constantly struggling with that. And then he tells us what we all know. Here's what I know, and you probably know too. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit. And he sets these two ideas up like against each other. Like what our flesh wants and appetites crave is like the opposite of what the Spirit, referring to God's Spirit, about like what he desires, and then what the Spirit desires for us and our lives and our world and our relationships and our people is often, very honestly, the opposite of my impulses, right? And they are in conflict with each other. You're like, yeah, I knew that. Like, that's my problem. And he says, so, get this, you do not do whatever you want. You do not do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. That's like That's like the mantra of our age. That's like the mantra of our generation. There's an interview with pop icon Billie Eilish in a Vogue magazine article a little while ago, defending her choice. She was defending her choice to wear this revealing corset in a photo shoot, which for many feminists was symbolic, and frankly, not just feminists, but others, symbolic of like misogyny and sexism. Like, why did you do that? And here was her answer. See, my thing, she says, my thing is, I can do whatever I want. It's all about what makes you feel good. My thing is, I can do whatever I want because it's all about what makes you feel good, which sounds good. I mean, no judgment there, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. Thank you, Elsa. But then you play that movie forward. You start to play that movie out a little bit, a society, a family, a community whose mantra is, my thing is, I do whatever I want. I do what makes me feel good. You play that out. And here's where Paul goes next with it. He says, this is how that ends up looking. The acts of the flesh, like the result of that mentality, it's obvious. Like, I don't even need to tell you. I don't even tell you this because you can see this everywhere you look. He's saying sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery. Now that's a great word. We don't use that anymore. That's like just unrestrained desire. That's like when you go, well, I don't even care anymore. I'm just going for it. That's what debauchery refers to. Idolatry, witchcraft, which actually, that's a weird translation of it. I think the word he uses there is actually pharmakeia, as in pharmacy. But when used with idolatry, that word often refers to like the seduction, the deceptions and the seductions of idolatry. It's like what gets twisted and turned around when the wrong thing becomes the ultimate thing in our life. I mean, it just really messes with our mental maps. And then check out the rest of this. Hatred. Think about this. Discord. Jealousy. Fits of rage. Selfish ambition, which could actually be translated like selfish manipulation. It's that thing in me that wants to weasel my way forward at maybe somebody else's expense. Dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. Here's my question. Sound familiar? Sound like anything maybe you've seen or read or heard recently? Like, this is the world we live in, and more so every day. And get this, it was the world that Paul and his Galatian friends lived in as well. This was the Greco-Roman world, and we are rapidly headed back towards it. It's the kind, he's saying, this is the kind of society and the kind of culture, and by the way, the kind of lives that we create when we do whatever we want. And he goes, it's obvious. Like, you've seen it, done it, got the t-shirt, know exactly what you're talking about. But then he says, but contrast that with another path. Contrast that with the path, or what he says, the way of the Spirit. He says the fruit of the Spirit is, in fact, let's read these things out loud together. There's just 9 of them. We can say them out loud. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, how does that sound? I mean, maybe you don't like every single word in that list. Like, I could do without maybe the self-control. But generally speaking, like, isn't that what you want more of? I mean, don't you want more love? Like real, genuine, not having to work it up or force myself to it, love for other people, joy, a deep sense of well-being, regardless of what's happening in my world, peace, a calm, non-anxious presence, hello, patience, an unhurried way of being present in this moment, faithfulness, like relational loyalty and commitment in an age of commitment phobia where pretty much all relationship bonds are treated as matters of temporary convenience, even the closest bonds to us, kindness, in an age of selfishness, goodness and gentleness in an age of anger and rage and unfiltered expression, self-control in an age of glorified unrestraint. Doesn't that sound better? Doesn't that sound better? Doesn't that sound like, I don't know, maybe I can't speak for you. Doesn't that sound like what you really want? Like what you really, really want. See, it turns out that our strongest desires are not always necessarily our deepest desires. Our strongest desires are not always necessarily our deepest desires. And for you, and maybe for me, and maybe for you, beneath the layers of some of those really strong desires of my flesh to just like let my tongue go and unleash like a string of like, I just want to give them a piece of my mind, or to like, I want to be the kind of parent that is coaching my children towards their best possible selves, but also I want them to shut up so I can watch TV, and I want them to figure out their annoying problems by themselves. Like those moments when there's a strong desire that really goes against the kind of person that I want to be, that often there is a much deeper desire, a deeper desire to be the best version of myself. The self that we said last week is actually your true self, who you really are, the me that I am created to be. There is a deeper desire beneath some of these stronger desires, and doesn't that best version of yourself look a little like that? Don't you wish that it did? And what if you didn't just want that to be the case? What if you actually had the ability? What if you didn't just have the desire for that to be true of you? What if you had the ability for that to be true? What if in that ongoing battle of the desires that are raging under your hood as they are in mine, what if you were free to be that person? And now, see, we begin to move to a very different definition of that word freedom. See, false freedom is the ability to do whatever I want. You do whatever you want. You don't let anybody tell you different, and that's happiness. To define good for ourselves, to pursue and enjoy and say and do and sleep with and spin and fantasize about whatever we want to. This has become the dominant view of freedom in the West and in our culture now, and we are all being socialized into that view, one Disney movie at a time, one commercial at a time, one Vogue magazine article at a time. However, this is not how Jesus and Paul, or by the way, any of the ancients in any society viewed freedom or the good life. In fact, Andrew Sullivan in a New York Magazine article writes this. This is so good. He says, for most of the ancients, freedom was freedom from our natural desires and material needs. Freedom from our natural desires and material needs, it rested on a mastery of these deep natural urges in favor of self-control, restraint, and education into virtue. They would look at our freedom and they would see licentiousness, chaos, and a slavery to desire, and they would predict misery and not happiness to be the result. False freedom, Paul says, leads to the unraveling and, in fact, the enslavement of the soul and of society, and it is a lie. It is a lie. It is like this, a lie that leads to this vicious cycle of spiritual and personal and relational dysfunction that we all know. He says it's obvious, and we open up our news feeds every single day and see how this plays out. Reality is what you run into when you're wrong. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever I want. No. True freedom is the ability to do whatever I ought. False freedom is the ability to do whatever I want. That's not freedom. True freedom is the ability to do whatever I want, whatever I ought. You, my brothers and sisters, you were called to be free. Do not use your freedom to indulge your desires or your flesh, but serve one another in love. The freedom, it's like the inner strength of character, of self-mastery to choose what is good, to actually choose in this moment, as difficult as it might be, to love, to serve the other person and their highest good in love. And get this, according to tons and tons of current research into happiness and well-being in a field of psychology known as positive psychology, which is a field of psychology that studies human flourishing, and it's been running for about 4 or 5 decades now. And the overwhelming, in fact, the unanimous results of all of the research into how human beings flourish is that truly the good life, according to Bible and science, is a life that's lived in love for others. That's just the unanimous result. That is what leads to happiness. That is what leads to long-lasting well-being. That is what leads to human flourishing. It's almost as if though they would not say this, it's almost as if we were created to thrive on self-giving, others-benefiting love. Like it's almost like we were made for that. Indulging the flesh, indulging my desires, surefire pathway to misery, dysfunction, and enslavement. Serving others in love is the pathway to freedom and flourishing. True freedom is the freedom to do what I ought. It's the freedom, the ability to consistently choose that, to ask what would be the loving thing to do. I mean, this is kind of getting unraveled here, and this situation is getting off the tracks, but what would be the loving thing for me to do this in this moment and to actually do that, which means to the extent that I'm not able to do that, to the extent that I don't have the capacity to choose that, even when I kind of want to. You know what that feeling's like? Like I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to do the loving thing. I did not seem to have the ability to do so. To the extent that I don't have the ability, then I am not actually free. I'm still enslaved to the gravitational pull of the impulses and the desires, and they're pull my string, and here's what starts to happen that aren't who I really want to be. It's kind of like comedian Ron White is famous for saying, I had the right to remain silent. Unfortunately, I did not have the ability. And to the extent that I don't have the ability, I'm actually not a free person. I'm still enslaved. So, how do we get there? As we wind down this series, as we wind down today, how do we get there? How do we move from being enslaved to these desires that are not who we really want to be towards this true expression of freedom and human flourishing? Paul in this section, and this becomes a bit simplified. He actually mentions two important things. These aren't the only two things, but we're going to end with the two things that he says in this section about moving towards this in our lives. And he begins, this journey begins with a constant act of my will to stand firm. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, to not allow myself to fall under a yoke of slavery, even when that yoke of slavery masquerades so deceptively as freedom. I can do what I want to do. I mean, it just sounds so good, but I go, no, that's a lie, and that will enslave me. Not going there. I am going to stand firm. It begins with this constant act of my will. Now, this has, until very recent years, mind you, been a constant in philosophy and ethics and education. In fact, this idea is the basis of liberal arts education, believe it or not, the idea of self-mastery. Of self-mastery, which is a combination of self-discipline, my ability to do what I don't really want to do when I need to do it, and self-control, my ability to not do what I kind of want to do when I need to not do it. That's self-mastery, like self-discipline and self-control brought together, self-mastery, which is like a muscle. It strengthens as you use it. It weakens when you don't. And this journey begins with this constant act of will to stand firm and not allow myself to be brought or fall under slavery again. Paul goes on to state this so firmly. Here's a line you will never read in a Vogue magazine article. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Crucified, like nailed it to a cross. Now, what Paul states in the past tense, have crucified the flesh, I believe this is part of that constant choice of will to crucify, to take an active personal stance against the things that are not loving, that are coming out of me, to stand against those desires, to not indulge them, to not give them free rein. And in the moments when I do indulge them, and I do, it's like, oh, and it felt for a moment so delicious, but it is going to come back as a poison, right? In those moments when I do indulge, I quickly move against it. The moment I realize it, I quickly move against those desires through humble, often embarrassing confession. And I need to own that was not actually true, the thing I just said, or that the way I talk to you, like my kids, like, oh, I'm so sorry, honey. that was not right. I am so sorry. I should not have said that, or the way I said it, like the humble, embarrassing acts of just confession and crucifying that thing and making amends. How do I make this up to you? I began to take this active stance against those desires. It begins with an act of will, like this constant act of will. But here's the deal, and we all know this is true. Willpower alone is not enough. Willpower is great. Willpower is great. It's a good thing to have. We need a power greater than our will. We need a power greater than ourselves. We need, as Paul says, God's Spirit. So here's how he ends. After saying we have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires, he says, since we live by the Spirit, like this is who we are. This is the real you. This is who you truly are. This is who we are. You know what we do? We live by the Spirit. That's what we do. And so let us keep in step with the Spirit. Now, throughout this section, Paul has used 4 different verbs in tandem. He's talked about walking with the Spirit in verse 16, being led by the Spirit in verse 18, living by and keeping step with the Spirit. And it's like there's this flow, and it's a big idea throughout the scriptures. There's this flow of God's strong, loving, empowering, good presence, and it's right here. It's right here, by the way. It's right here. It's available, and it is with us at all times, and we can either be in that flow or out of it. We can either be surrendered to it, going with that flow, or we can be ignoring it, or we can even be actively resisting that flow. Like, no, I do not want to do the loving thing right now. Like, I know what it is, and I just want to say this anyway. I can resist being in that flow. But there is the flow, and it is right there. Step 2 of Alcoholics Anonymous says, there is a power greater than me that can restore me to sanity. What good news is that? And the choice of being in the flow of God's greater power, his empowering Spirit, is moment by moment. It's a choice of willingness. It's like walking. It's like walking, just step by step, decision after decision, one decision at a time, to surrender to God's flow in complete willingness, moment by moment, to say, what are you up to now? What is the loving thing to do? And give me the power to do it, to use my freedom, to constantly use my freedom to serve the person in front of me for their highest good. What would be the loving thing to do? God, give me the power to do it. And the good news is it's always there. It's always there. It's always available, which means the moment I realize that I've stepped out of it, the moment I am so conscious of the fact that I just indulged my desire, I just went for it. The moment I realize that, guess what I can do? I can step right back in. It's still right there. I can, in that moment, say yes to God. In that moment, once again, invite God's Spirit to do in me what I cannot do for myself while I do the things that I can. I can, in that moment, actively stand against my own shortcomings and crucify those desires and confess and embarrass myself and apologize and be real and honest. And I can ask God's Spirit to give me the strength to be the person he created me to be. If we walk by the Spirit, if we live by the Spirit, let's do that. Let's keep in step with the Spirit. And so as we close, I want to invite us to do that together right now. Just as like to bow our heads, close our eyes, and invite that into our lives right now, to step into that flow. And so as you bow your head, close your eye, I don't know where you're at spiritually. I don't know what your day is like. I don't know what your week's been like. I know this season is a difficult one, and I know this week has been hard for many. But I don't know on a personal level where your choices have taken you, where your relationships are, where you are at in relation to choices you've made and the desires that seem to at times overwhelm you. So I don't know where you're at, but wherever that is, this is a great moment to just say yes to God. Just tell him yes. I would love to be that better version of myself. Heavenly Father, that person of love and joy and peace, oh my goodness, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I would love to have that growing in me, becoming who I really am. And so in this moment, I surrender to you, to this power greater than me, to the flow of your Spirit. And I pray for all of us as we walk out of this room, just into the week or into our Memorial Day weekend, that we would have the awareness step by step of being willing and responsive to you and how you might be guiding us, to being loving in that moment. And the moments we catch ourselves out, that we would just be quick to step back in and say yes to you and start again. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for coming. By the way, if you've gotten anything out of like this week or any of this series, you can always show or share this with friends around you, wherever they are, across the country, across the world, really. YouTube.com, Our Terra Nova. Share it. By the way, if you did get something out of this, invite them back with you next week as we kick off our brand new series. It's going to be great. On your way out, before you jet, I just want to remind you about that Connect card that Lyle was telling you about. And if you're a guest, again, thank you so much for being here. We'd love to hear from you, just whatever part of this you feel comfortable filling out, even if you don't want to fill out the whole thing. We would love to hear from you. And remember, we're going to be donating $5 for every single one of these cards to the Wounded Warrior Foundation because it's Memorial Day weekend. So you can throw this card in the offering baskets by the doors on the way out that the guest services teams will be holding. You can also throw your offering envelope in there. And you can throw this whole summer life group brochure in there. Signing up is so easy. Lyle was telling you about this. Just write the group number and your contact information. You can also scan the QR code. You got all this. Go online. Our website's right there as well. Sign up for a group. Groups are about to start, so jump in. Don't miss it. You can drop this brochure in the offering basket. And, of course, you can drop your offering envelopes in the basket as well. By the way, this weekend is something we call Terra Nova Tours. It's tomorrow, right after the 11 a.m. service, and a bunch of people are signed up, but walk-ins are welcome. If you're thinking about it, or if, that's the first time you've heard of it, at 12:30 next door here tomorrow, and we got free lunch, free childcare, and we'd love to have you. It's a great way to get to know more about Terra Nova and maybe take your next step around here. And then don't forget, next week, come back as we kick off our brand new series, God on Film, with this movie right here, I think. Check it out. Am I right? I am not right. Okay, that's just a see you later then. That was it. I thought we had a trailer there. Okay, God bless you guys. Have a fantastic week.